In today's Locked On Pelicans, I'll tell you why letting Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram go for nothing could actually lead to the best possible rebuild for the Pels. Plus, I'll tell you what their most valuable asset actually is. It's the Thursday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Thursday game day for the Pelicans as they try and get back to winning ways. Let's see if they do that. We'll, of course, recap that in tomorrow's episode, but let's get a little crazy with it here on Locked On Pelicans. We focused a lot on Brandon Ingram and CJ McCollum the past couple of days, but what if you just let Zion Williamson go for nothing or virtually nothing, along with Brandon Ingram, a full-on rebuild? Is that something that's doable? What does that look like? I'll explain why it could be the best option for New Orleans in today's episode. Plus, what is their most valuable asset? I'll tell you what that is. And good news is they have a bunch of it. It's coming up in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans, brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well, and sign up for the free daily Locked On Pelicans newsletter over at LockedOnDaily.com. So let's get into this one. And I've got my salary cap sheet up on one of the monitors here. We're going to break it all down, and we've kind of touched on this, the past couple of days on the show as well. But what happens if you let Brandon Ingram just walk for nothing, go in free agency? We went over, it's not a great thing, right? Letting one of these two, because they're in similar situations, is bad. And look, Zion Williamson can be waived as of right now, and you don't have to pay him. That's what the non-guarantees in his deal are. You just waive him, and he becomes a free agent. You just cut the guy. Maybe that's a good move. Maybe it's not. Normally by itself, that would not be a smart thing. Someone would sign him, maybe reinvest his career. It's like you got nothing in return for Zion. Trading him is also, I think, a little bit tough right now. You'd get virtually nothing of value in return for him, though he probably has more value than Brandon Ingram does. So letting just one of them go, whether it's waiving Zion or letting Brandon Ingram walk in free agency, is bad. It doesn't help you other than, get rid of a potential headache in the player. It saves you money against the luxury tax, but it doesn't help you win, and it does not help you rebuild because you're still over the NBA's soft cap. We broke it down that if they just let Brandon Ingram walk, they're over the soft cap by about $11 million or so. So it's not like you have money in free agency to spend or anything like that, and you can rebuild quickly. And that's just also not the way that the NBA works anymore. But what if you let both of them go? And that, I think, is kind of interesting. So the Pelicans' salary, if Brandon Ingram just walks and other expiring deals fall off right now, so Zion, Murray, CJ, Trey, Herb, Hawkins, Jose, Misi, Reeves, Makovich, and a first-round pick I'm including in there. I picked the 5th overall pick just as that salary to kind of use as a placeholder here. Their total salary is basically $165.5 million. That's over the soft cap by about $11 million. Okay, that's not great. But what if you just you let Brandon Ingram walk and you just waive Zion and just be like, screw it. Take his salary, and I'm literally hitting delete here on the spreadsheet, off the books. Now, all of a sudden, in cap room, you have $28.5 million. Now, you don't go and spend that money in free agency at all, unless you just need it to kind of fill out the 4 or 5 open roster spots that you would have. You don't need to necessarily do that, though. You can just get guys on minimum deals and let them expire. You're going to be bad. Your team at best is DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Trey, Herb Jones, Hawkins, and the rest of the guys. I don't think you're a bottom 5 team, but you've at least cleared some money, and it allows you to take on a bad contract for future draft picks. And that's what you would be trying to do in a rebuild here. You would be probably firing the current front office and go and be bad for an extended period of time, because DeJounte, CJ, Trey, Herb, Misi. It's not horrible, but I don't think it's a particularly great elite team at anything. But what if you're also able to shed CJ McCollum's salary? Maybe it's this year. You trade CJ for a $20 million player and a $10 million player. And let's say the $20 million one is on the books next year, but the $10 million guy is not. So we're changing CJ to a $20 million player here. That all of a sudden opens things up in a really interesting way. Now, all of a sudden, they basically have a shade under $40 million. And a $20 million, call it 1 or 2 year contract. $40 million, you can take on some bad deals. You also have at this point $72.5 million to the luxury tax. What you could then do is take on a bad contract like Zach LaVine or something like that and be like, yeah, Bulls, if you want to trade him, you need to give us 2 first-round picks to take on Zach LaVine's contract or another player of that kind of level here. So your team, has Zach LaVine on a bad deal, Murray, Trey, Herb, Misi, kind of those are your starters. It's not a bad team, but also what if there's just a bad player or an injured player on that kind of contract that you could bring in who's not going to help you win? Those are the type of contracts that you would be looking at. Teams trying to dump that with whatever draft picks they want to attach to it. This is essentially what the Oklahoma City Thunder did, right? They took on Gordon Hayward's real bad deal for draft picks. They took on other bad contracts for draft picks. You do not use your cap space to sign players, not that any big names really change in free agency anyway. You do this to rent your cap space to other teams for their not good players. And I think that is the way that you go about this rebuild. You're going to be bad. You're going to be bad for the next couple of years, but your books are going to be clean and you're going to have a bunch of draft picks. Even if they're not all lottery picks, you'll have your own picks. More on those in the third segment. That's the most valuable thing that the Pelicans own right now. You'll have all these other picks that you can use to trade or do whatever you want with. And the draft can be a crapshoot, so having more picks is a really important thing. And then once that CJ McCollum $20 million traded player expires off the books, all of a sudden now you're at $60 million in cap space, essentially. You can kind of do whatever you want. It's going to be a period of real bad times. It's not going to be fun to cover here on Locked On Pelicans, but this is truly the best way to rebuild. This is what OKC has done. They landed Shea. They cleared their books. They traded for bad contracts to draft more guys or to use in a future trade. They could go and trade for anybody in the league pretty much that's available right now. And probably some guys that aren't normally available. They have that many assets and that many picks. The Pelicans are not in that position. That war chest that they've gotten for Drew Holiday, for Anthony Davis, is starting to dry up in terms of the picks. And because they wanted to try and compete right away, it's led them to this salary cap situation that they are in currently. And it's not a great one to be in, particularly for a small market. Detroit should have been not been using their cap space to sign guys like Tobias Harris, in my opinion, though he's helped them and they've done well. They should have been tanking hard, and that's what this would essentially do. And in my opinion, that's maybe the best way to go about a full-on rebuild. It's going to take you half a decade minimum. More on that in the next segment here, because it's not guaranteed that you get out of this. But you get rid of Zion, you get rid of Ingram, you get rid of CJ in various means, even if you don't get much in return for him. And look, if you could trade Zion for an expiring deal and a draft pick, cool. Or a bad contract that's 2 years, well, it'll expire in 2 years and we got a draft pick or two out of it. That's great. Same thing for Ingram, and maybe there'll be a trade at the trade deadline that's like, yeah, whatever, we're a little bit desperate. Let's take the risk on Ingram, and you make a deal. CJ, we heard the rumors that we talked about yesterday. There been some interest there. There's ways to clear your books, and basically you keep Trey, Herb, and then DeJounte Murray is kind of your core guys. Maybe Murray later wants to leave, and that's fine. You're trying to build around a young guy that you draft, and they would be in a good position to try and do that. But it can go haywire. It can go haywire. This sounds great. No more of that. Let's be bad. Let's tank. Let's do all of that. It's not guaranteed that you get out of those dark woods and those dark places. I want to explore that with some stats for you. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by my go-to ticketing app, Game Time. Game Time is a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. And Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. This is why I love Game Time. All of the different features that they have. Some of the other really great features. The seat view. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. You can also toggle the all-in pricing up front. There's not going to be any surprise fees at checkout if you toggle this. They also have the lowest price guarantee. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time is going to credit you 110% of the difference. So now is always the best time to buy on Game Time. You're going to get the lowest price. They also have flash deals, though. You're bored on a Friday night, a Saturday night, trying to plan a good date night. Get on the Game Time app, see what's really cheap, and all of a sudden, boom, you've had an awesome experience. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast for a reason. And now for your second listen, it's reading the Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter over at lockedondaily.com. Just scroll down, subscribe to it with your email. You're going to get Locked On Pelicans in your inbox Monday through Friday, along with really great league coverage. We have some great fantasy basketball coverage as well. It's just a great thing to see. It takes 2 minutes to read. No reason not to sign up because it is free over at lockedondaily.com. So let's keep talking about kind of the nuclear option. I don't even know what you would call this. Right? It's possible. It's possible to really clear the books. And again, not to try and get new players or to be competitive in free agency or anything like that. It's to just not deal with this anymore and usher in a new era that may honestly take a while to get to. Let me ask you this. If this team was bad for 5 years, are you going to be paying attention? I'll be paying attention. They're going to have to like carry me out of here in a straitjacket or something or whatever. But, you know, what's your interest level going to be? It can be brutal. It's not fun to watch lose. One of the, the biggest reason that I've long said for the everydayers of the show is why they've struggled to really attract like a consistent fan base at times is, they've never made the playoffs. They made the playoffs in back-to-back years once in franchise history, something like that, maybe twice. And it was like over 15 years ago. That's not a fun position to be in. You want to have a consistent winner, at least for 5 years. Make the playoffs 4 straight years or something like that. Watch everyone get excited. Even if you're losing in the first round, it means you're winning games. And that's ultimately what we want. And so while this rebuild in theory sounds great, clear salary, be able to get all the draft picks, find the next superstar in this draft or the next. And look, there's 2 really good drafts coming up. This draft has 5 impactful players in it. Next year's draft has like 2 or 3 as of now impactful players in it. What it'll look like in a year. That's exciting to think about, but it doesn't always work out, right? You could be OKC where they have Shea, who they traded for, and, added other guys that they've really drafted Chet, drafted J-Dub, and then they had the free agent money to go and sign Hartenstein, who's a perfect fit for them. They can still do whatever they want. They have all the flexibility to. It's a really great position to be in, but they're kind of maybe 1-on-1. Look, if you look at, some of these teams that have had long playoff droughts, you can try and be bad and it doesn't always work out. The Sacramento Kings had a 16-season long playoff drought. The Los Angeles Clippers had a 15-year drought of not making the postseason. The Timberwolves had a 13-year playoff drought, right? It doesn't necessarily guarantee that you are going to be in a good position in the future. You can even go to the current playoff droughts right now. Charlotte is at 8 years. Detroit is 5, and that's with a #1 overall pick in there, right? Charlotte has had multiple number 2, 3 picks, and they still haven't been able to get out of it. San Antonio is on a 5-year playoff drought. All 3 of those teams don't look like they'll make the postseason this year. Houston is, but, it was looking dicey for a minute. Portland's been 3 years. And they don't show there's nothing to say they have their cornerstone guy and they're going to kind of break this and become a consistent team. Same for the Washington Wizards. They traded Bradley Beal and they don't look like they're going to be in the postseason anytime soon. There are big risks with this, and I don't think the franchise is going to tolerate that. They know they want to win. It matters when it comes to money and interest. They just took the big hit in terms of money on the Bally Sports and now Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network stuff. This isn't an ideal situation for them to try and go with. And also, do you want that? Do you want to go through a 5-season-long playoff drought? I don't particularly want that. Playoffs are fun. Even those 2 games, even though they weren't great, against OKC were pretty fun. I like playoff basketball. I like games mattering late in the regular season. Win or lose, it makes you feel alive, right? All of that. You wouldn't be going through any of that for a very, very long time. Look, the Clippers had multiple top picks in that playoff drought. It didn't amount to anything. Sometimes those players don't work out, right? The future was supposed to be different with Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram, and here we are talking about blowing it up. Is it better maybe to give it one more crack with Zion Williamson, with Brandon Ingram, trading CJ McCollum to make that work? You know, it's up to you as an individual to decide with that sort of thing. But it's not, you know, a great situation to find yourself in. Now, this also isn't a good existing situation to find yourself in. And if this wasn't such a better draft this year and next year where you would have a realistic shot at getting those picks, maybe that's what changes kind of the math on this and, you know, the weighing of the pros and cons with it. But it's also no guarantee that you get those top picks, right? Detroit had the worst record by far last year, and they didn't get the number 1 overall pick. That's not a great position to be in. So it can still be a massive risk when it comes to that sort of thing. And that's definitely not a situation that you want to be in. You may never get out of the muck, essentially. There's no guarantee. You know, a lot of this and what the front offices do is just weighing the risks. Is this one riskier than this option? And trying to go along with that. But this front office wouldn't be making those decisions. You know, you would hire a new front office in and then knowingly being like, you need ownership to sign off on this immediately. And I don't know if they would. Look, you know, does that mean you then keep Willie Green, knowing you're going to let him go? Do you hire a young up-and-coming coach, you know, knowing that they can take risks and that they're going to have a lot of job security because you should? Or, you know, everyone's got to be aligned on this, and I don't think it's that easy to align everybody on this kind of situation when it comes down to it. So it makes sense if that's the way they want to go. They could. But I think it's much more likely that they're like, yeah, Zion will be healthy soon. Hopefully, let's run it back with him next year, try and be competitive and see where this all goes. But as we said, it's a risk. There's no guarantee that that's really a situation that would work out. So you've got to kind of weigh the pros and cons of it. But if they're going to do a rebuild, it's not a quick retool. It's not we get, you know, Cooper Flag and let's go for it again. No, it's do this a little more properly, right? They could have done this in a sense around Zion Williamson and they didn't, partially because of the players they got in the Anthony Davis trade. If they were just bad, you know, could that have kind of changed things? But they had the number 1 overall pick before the AD trade. But if he was open to going to other teams, could they maybe have then moved him for more just draft picks and salary cap relief? Even though they got a bunch of draft picks, they got a bunch of players. That deal still looks absolutely great for New Orleans at the time, even if this ultimately didn't work out in the way that we had hoped. It's tough, right? Like, look, this is a reason why people in the front office get paid a lot of money. It's not an easy job. It's not easy to try and figure all of this out. And, you know, we'll find out what they end up doing here. I think it's very unlikely they let Brandon Ingram walk for nothing and then just completely cut Zion Williamson. And if they do that, it's either a new front office is going to do that or this current front office is going to have a lot of assurances from ownership in that group on what this would look like and what they need to do. So it's an option. It's a nuclear option, but it's an option. What do you think of it? Let me know in the comments down below. No matter what, though, the Pelicans are in a better position, at least this year, than you think because of the most important draft assets that they own. And that's their own picks. And I'll tell you why that is. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to take on all the NFL and NBA action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL and NBA all in one place. Those lines are always updating. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You know where momentum is going. There was an injury. Get in on the updated lines. And you can do that by just visiting FanDuel.com and joining today. And you're going to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet, or just bet against the Pelicans. That seems like a good option too. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And go make Locked On Saints your second listen. What's going to go on with the end of the Saints season? Ross Jackson is breaking down everything black and gold over at Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. By the way, tomorrow I'll be on Locked On NBA Game Night, recapping this game among others that we're going to be watching. Pelicans lose to the Sacramento Kings. We're going to have some thoughts on that one. That one shouldn't count for Sacramento if that's what they end up pulling off here. So let's look at the Pelicans' most important assets. And there is a couple here that I think are really, really important. And that is their own draft picks. No matter what, I don't care what deal is out there, under no circumstances, should the Pelicans trade their own first round picks. They gave up the Los Angeles Lakers pick in that deal for DeJounte Murray. Could you imagine right now if they included their own first round pick in that? Currently slated as the #2 overall pick. That would be a horrible feeling right now. They have the second worst record, right? As what is making noise here? Why is Tankathon making noise? Anyway, you cannot trade your own draft picks at all. These are the most important assets that the Pelicans have. You know, when you look at a team like Milwaukee who doesn't control their own draft pick in the future, it either comes to New Orleans, I forget who it goes to another team otherwise. They can't trade Giannis because if they do, they're bad. And whoever owns their draft picks, whether it's the Pelicans or others, are going to reap the benefits of that. They won't reap the benefits of their own tanking. They've got to hope other teams are bad with draft picks they would get for whoever they trade Giannis to, but they can't get their own, right? You saw the Brooklyn Nets go out of their way to reacquire their own first round picks so that if they were just going to be bad, they would at least reap the benefits of it and not another team, right? The Atlanta Hawks can't trade Trae Young. You do that, you're going to be really, really bad. And you know who benefits? The San Antonio Spurs. That's why the most likely rumored destination for Trae Young is to San Antonio, pair him with Wemby, because then they would get their own draft picks back. And it's like, look, you got the player, and now we're bad. We're going to have a couple top overall picks. That's the most important thing that the Pelicans own right now is their own draft picks. If Ingram is gone in some capacity and we don't know really what the future holds with Zion Williamson, and look, it's more up in the air than it's probably ever been before after this just latest injury and just stuff around him. I don't even care about the viral video that, that was over the summer. That was old. He shouldn't ever really look like that, but whatever. You can get in shape. That's not the biggest deal, especially if he was still recovering from that hamstring injury and things like that he suffered in the play-in tournament. All of this is to say, like, you've got to keep your own draft picks. Other teams would be salivating right now for the Pelicans to do a stupid win now move and trade for somebody and give up one of their own future picks, even if it's lottery protector or whatever. You can't do that. That's a valuable, valuable asset. They cannot give that up. You've got to figure out how to do this and make it work without trading your own first round picks, because those would be some of the most coveted in the league, especially if Brandon Ingram gets traded this season. And that likely means a deal for CJ is coming during the season or during the off season. And then who knows what Zion, if Zion's bat gets hurt next year and you go down again, it's like, cool, we're playing for a top 4 pick. Oh wait, nope, that's owned to somebody else because we traded for a power forward or we traded a first round pick to the Cavaliers for a center. Can't do that. They need to make sure that they don't trade their own draft picks. It's the most valuable thing that they own, especially when you've seen other teams really go out of their way to try and go and acquire those draft picks and things like that. That's what like is a telling sign when it comes to everything, right? Look, Atlanta is 13-12. They're the 7th seed. They're not going to be above that. It would be in their best interest to trade Trae Young, except they would be bad and then they wouldn't reap the benefits of it. So you're bad without a good draft pick. What is the point of that? You may as well try and make the postseason and get in through the play-in tournament. And then even if you lose, whatever, we have the 14th overall pick. And that's better than at least not having a chance, I think, and not having any draft pick. That stuff like truly does matter. And I think that's something that's really worth keeping in mind. If the Pelicans make a deal, I don't care what it is. There's some where I probably would be like, okay, that works. But they better keep their own draft picks because those are going to be very, very valuable potentially, especially because they could go through a massive rebuild, whether intentional or not, very easily and very quickly. So hopefully they do not trade those away. And I would be very, very upset if that was the case. All right, let's see what happens with the Sacramento Kings tonight. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NolaJake on Twitter. We'll eventually stop talking about trades and tanking and kind of get back to other things with this team. I want to look more at Yves Missi. I want to look at some three-point shooting as well and some other really important things around the team. But here's the nuclear option. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'll see y'all tomorrow.